Welcome to the Asia Pacific eBook Forum 2020. I'm glad library leaders in Asia Pacific could join us today, as the theme of the webinar is very much reflective of our current times. I'm Sumit, Marketing Director Asia Pacific for Elsevier and your host today. Through the work of our experts, Professor David and Dr. Lucy, today's webinar focuses on immediate practicalities of providing library services during a pandemic, particularly now as long-term future is not clear. Also, we have three eminent panelists joining us today for the webinar. I want to welcome Dinah Chan, Caroline Williams, and Dan Brookswood. Our panelists will be sharing their experiences and the solutions to deal with disruption related to the pandemic. So please stay tuned for the entire webinar to learn more on the best practices and framework to deal with the uncertainties. We'll be doing active polls, and there will be a dedicated Q&A session in the last segment of the webinar. You can type in your question in the Q&A box. So I'm inviting Professor David and Dr. Lucy. Professor David was Principal and Chief Executive of Plymouth Marjon University and is Emeritus Professor of Strategic Information Management. Dr. Lucy is Associate of David Baker Consulting and Honorary Research Fellow at Exeter University. Professor David and Dr. Lucy are co-editors of the forthcoming Elsevier book, Future Directions in Digital Information, Predictions, Practice, and Participation. May I now welcome Professor David and Dr. Lucy to share their thoughts with us.
Thank you, Sumit. And if we could move to the next slide, please, I will open our discussions. What do we know about COVID? Lucy and I, as Sumit has already said, have been working on a book which is very timely and talks about COVID. COVID is clearly going to be a catalyst for change. There's no doubting that. Adaptation is going to be the key, and what we hope to discuss with you today is embracing the practicalities of dealing with COVID. It's obvious that technology is proving its worth and its primacy in dealing with this. Lucy and I are working at the moment with two universities in the UK. One of them has provided access to 12,000 ebooks for its students. Another has access for its students to 1 million volumes. One of those libraries has more of a problem than the other, I think you could say. There is already a major rethink of provision of space, of collections and services, and especially, as you'll hear today from our panelists, changes in the balance between print and digital, very much toward digital. You'll also hear about new supply chains, the old supply chains no longer valid. We've already heard about the demise, the closing of one major library book supplier. What will happen in terms of the future supply chain between the author, the publisher, the library, the user? But as librarians, perhaps at some point fairly soon, we should take a moment to reflect on our role as people who preserve for the future, and how are we as librarians going to preserve the experience of COVID for future generations? Next slide, please.
Thank you, David. And what you're seeing on your screen now is the result of a poll that was conducted by Suzanne Hall of Elsevier, of an Elsevier ebook webinar for the Australian and New Zealand area. And she asked delegates to vote for 3 topics that they would most like to hear more about in the next webinar, which is this webinar now. So we've based this webinar on what's concerning people at the moment. And as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, delegates were given 7 options of issues that we'd like to talk about, and ranging from practical issues through to high-level strategic issues, case studies, etc. And no surprises really that the main issue is the practical one. What are the practical issues facing libraries during and post COVID-19? Following a close second is the issue of where libraries need to place themselves on the digital print continuum That's an easy question to ask, but not an easy question to answer for librarians. Coming a close third is the future of digital information as it relates to library. And it's worth noting that this is a close match for the title of the book that's being featured in this webinar. And we are hopeful that the book will go some way in answering these current concerns. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Lucy. In preparing for this webinar and also the book that Lucy talked about, we identified a number of immediate challenges, and you'll be hearing more about those from our panelists, and we'll be talking about them. Access and availability during the time of COVID, that's obviously the top priority, with a significant reprioritization from physical to digital materials. But as Lucy said, that's easier said than done. What about the terms and conditions of access? What about the use of existing freely available resources and their quality? They are of quality, but not all are of quality. And clearly there's going to be an issue of increased support for information literacy amongst our users, especially when they are working remotely. And librarians have had a particular challenge of managing remote working, especially of their staff, the library staff, academic staff, users, and so on. And clearly, one of the other issues has been the reassigning of library resources, whether it's the materials, the services, and especially reassigning library staff to new tasks or tasks that they've only done to a certain extent, which now becomes a full, if not the only part of their work. That's not to say that physical libraries don't have a role. They obviously do, and there is continuing demand for physical library space, people wanting to go into buildings and see library staff and actually use physical library books. But significant challenges, of course, for librarians in reopening library, through which they have to limit numbers in the library, limiting concentration of users, promoting hygiene and keeping staff safe. I was much impressed by a website that the UK's Chartered Institute for Library and Information Professionals has put up about checking your library's resilience. How robust is the library in the face of significant challenges such as COVID? Next slide, please.
So, on to the future. This is our final slide for our presentation. Remote working based on technology brings enormous opportunities and privileges, but we must guard against the fragmentation that this brings, fragmentation of teams of people who are used to working together, and there is a danger of professional isolation, which to some degree can, if we're not careful, threaten our shared values and our sense of cohesion in our professional identities. The information ecosystem will develop in ways that are difficult to predict, but one thing we can perhaps be sure of is that we seem to be on a track taking us from digital first to digital only, and libraries have a serious need now to provide for sustainable off-premises access to their collections and to their information and their staff expertise. With digital comes a potentially limitless user base. The online user is anyone and everyone, and not forgetting, of course, the rise of the non-human user, considering the exponential rise in the future use of artificial intelligence. David.
So we have an obvious trend, ongoing globalization. We live in a global world anyway, but COVID, that catalyst I talked about earlier, is increasing international collaboration. We have a great example of international collaboration here today with so many countries represented, both on the panel and in terms of the audience. There's going to be a much more diverse market for services, for content, for provision of all kinds. Are we seeing a move to more outsourcing of our provision from the traditional library hub? But I'd like to make I think an important point for the future, that we may think at the moment that the change is going to be discontinuous. But one of the advantages of being my age is that I wouldn't say I've seen it all before, but there have been these trends before now. And I remember in the 1990s, a great move in academic libraries, particularly from holdings to access. And indeed, I wrote quite a lot about that. I think we're in a new mode of moving from holdings to access in this COVID world. And I would argue, and certainly the libraries we've been working with recently, Lucy and I, what we are advising them to do, and what they are doing anyway, is moving forward much more quickly a lot of the kind of things that they were doing anyway. So it's not quite as discontinuous as at the moment we might think. I think there are two things that we have to focus on as librarians. One is, what is our core purpose? And I believe that is remaining focused on delivering meaningful value. If we don't deliver meaningful value as librarians, what is our role? So what is the delivery of meaningful value? And what is our future as information professionals? I think in some ways it's what it's always been. We are the honest brokers. We provide the quality information dispassionately, with the open access that the library has always prided itself on having. So thank you for listening to our presentation. Sumit, over to you for our first poll, and then we'll hear from our panelists. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Professor David and Dr. Lucy, for sharing insights with us today. Now let's get some feedback from our audience through poll. Here on your screen, you will see poll question number 1. Yeah, may I request all our audience to respond to the poll question now visible on your screen. We'll be having just less than a minute for you to take a response on that. I'll encourage all of you to participate in this poll. Yeah, nice, interesting. Thanks for your participation. Yes, we have reached 50% mark of participants have completed the poll. Yes, we'll wait for a couple of more seconds before we close the poll. Yeah, good. We would like to close the poll now. It's nearly more than one minute. Please, can we have the poll closed and the response is visible on the screen? What were the results? Yes. So it's interesting. Move to remote provision is the majority of audience are saying that since the onset of pandemic, they have been most successful in providing remote provision. And second to that is access to collections is what our audience have voted. So let's quickly move on to the second poll question. May I request our audience to respond to poll now visible on their screen? Yes, what proportion of your collections and services are now accessible digitally, given that most of the audience said that remote provision is the largest priority that they had, biggest priority they had. Good. We'll be closing the poll in next 50, yeah, next 30 to 40 seconds. Yeah, please, I'll encourage you all to participate in the poll. 50% of participants have already voted. Yeah, we are closing to a 1 minute time now. Yeah. Yeah. 10 more seconds to go, please. Okay, good. Can we have the poll results now for the second poll question? Yes. So we are saying that what our audience is saying that 61 to 80% of our collections are accessible digitally. That's very interesting. Finally, we have poll question 3, and may we have the third question on the poll now on the screens? Yes. What are your 3 greatest worries? Do let us know your 3 greatest worries. Yeah, yeah. Thank you to the audience for responding. Yeah, please. Yeah, we are reaching the 50% mark of participation by the audience. Yes, we are there. Couple of seconds more. Yeah, we are 60% of the participants have already voted. Wonderful. Couple of seconds more we have. I'll encourage all our audience to respond to the poll question visible on your screen. Yeah, that's good. Now, can we have the poll results on our screen now? So, what are the 3 greatest worries? Are the first one is loss of services, supplies, and staff reduction. That's the highest, and then followed by inability to provide access to physical collections and digital collections, and then followed by, I mean, there's a tie between user dissatisfaction and increased cost. So, so that's what is the topmost worries that our audience have today. So I'd like to thanks our audience for participating in the poll. Over to Professor David and Dr. Lucy. What are your thoughts about the poll results? Do the poll response surprise you?
In some ways they do, yes. I think in terms of the first question, if we ask that series of questions in 12 months' time, I think the answers might be very different. I'm not surprised that only 9% have talked about new services. It's too early to say what new services might be. I think those will emerge over a period of time. I'm also slightly surprised that only 29% said about remote services. I think a number of libraries, I would have argued that more libraries than that have been very successful. In terms of the move to digital, however, I'm pleasantly surprised at the numbers who've got above 50%. If you add the top 3 levels together, you're over half of the participants who've delivered are delivering at least half of their material, their collections, remotely. In terms of the third question, again, I'm slightly surprised that reduced income isn't higher on the list. I think it's too early to say, but I think one of the worries that might emerge over the next 12 months or so, especially in academic institutions where I know well, certainly in the UK and some other countries, universities are very worried about the loss of income through reduction in student numbers, reduction in student fees, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, I can understand why the immediate worries are as they are, not least inability to provide sufficient physical resources. Lucy, any additional thoughts on what I've said?
No, I think that's a good summary. What I would say, though, is that the poll questions have been designed quite well, because I think what you're seeing is a really interesting spread of responses. And there obviously there's a very diverse range of librarians out there and providing different types of library services. So that's something for us to bear in mind for future research, is just how varied the library ecosystem is.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Sumit. I think that's been a really excellent poll, and I know we've got another poll coming up toward the end of our discussion. So
Yes,
I
that's
think we'll
true.
look forward to that one as well.
Yes. So for our second segment of our webinar today, we have an international panel of 3 library leaders who will describe their experience and solutions to deal with disruption related to the pandemic. So without further ado, let me invite Professor David and Dr. Lucy to lead the panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Sumit. Well, first of all, we've got our 3 panelists who are going to talk about their experiences of COVID, and then we'll have a panel discussion and open it to a Q&A session to all our participants. Without further ado, Diana, I'd like you to tell us your experience of responding to COVID to date. Diana, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, David. Thank you for giving me this opportunity so that we can share some of the practical measures that our university library have been doing during the pandemic. Well, I'm going to share on 3 areas. One is on the physical protection, hygiene, and distancing. Now, when we are hit with the pandemic, we spray the whole library building with an antimicrobial coating. Now, that is a coating developed or invented by our own university. And that coating, it's very effective, 99.9% in killing viruses and bacteria and germs up to 90 days. So far, we have sprayed the whole library building twice already. All surfaces, furniture, keyboards were sprayed. That's the first thing we did. Now, another thing we have done is we have also installed a smart fever screening system. That is also another invention by the university. We installed a screening system by the library entrance. So we are able to screen the users coming in with a fever. Okay. By using artificial intelligence, real-time tracking, and big data analysis, we're able to see to have the data. Now you can see that from the circulation counter, we are equipped with a remote tablet PC, and then the real data, video, and the thermal data is displayed in that remote tablet. So the system triggers an alarm if the human body temperature is over, say, 37.5 Celsius. So we'll recognize the unwell person whose face is bracketed in red. You can see from the screen capture there. So the library staff can step in and take needed action to advise the users not to come in or to go to the clinic to seek medical help. So, and also we have moved away 3/4 of the chairs in the library, and all the library and even library staff have to wear a mask at all time when they are in the library. So this is a protection to our users and also to ourselves. Now, all the return books are processed with ultraviolet book sterilizer. And of course, cleaning in the library is more frequent, and airflow is increased with stronger ventilation. Okay, now that is from the physical protection side and social distancing side. Now, from the virtual access services and user educations, we have introduced a material retrieval service for books and also for DVD. So although the book is available on the shelf, but our users can request that item from our catalog. We provide interlibrary loan and the Hong Kong OR, which is an interlibrary loan with the Hong Kong Academic Library Service as much as possible. Not every day though. And we screen the highly used print books in our collection and try to replace them with electronic versions. And also all our library classes, workshops, orientation have moved from face-to-face to online. We use Zoom. We also have introduced several online sessions to the faculty, to the users on how to use eBooks, highlight to them some e-resources and some free e-resources provided to us by a lot of the publishers. Now, during this time, we have also explored the controlled digital lending, which is a service provided by the Open Library from Internet Archive. So we are able to make links to some of the books which we don't have digital copy. We make links, especially to cost reserve. So we are using that service. And we also have replaced our counter service with virtual info desk. And we use WhatsApp. You know, WhatsApp is very popular in Asia. We use WhatsApp to answer users' questions. Now, I have also highlighted to you some of the concerns from us. We received requests from the faculty requesting us to provide unlimited number of users to e-textbooks. Now, we look at their requests, and some of the e-textbooks, they are not provided with unlimited number of users, and some of them are unaffordable. Yeah, so this is one of our concerns. Now, the other concern is just like what Lucy and David has shared earlier, how to convert a good part of our print collection to e collection. So this involves priority setting, and also we have to invest. We have to put in a large investment in financial resources and staff resources. Okay, so I think this is what I like to share in these three areas. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Diana. Many thanks. That's really very useful. I was particularly impressed by the way in which the university has used its own resources to develop new ways of coping. I would like to come back to that in the later discussion. Without further ado, I'd like to move to you, Caroline. Welcome, Caroline, from Australia. And if we could hear your experiences of dealing with COVID to date. Caroline.
Thanks, David, and hello, everyone. I've got things to share in two key areas, one around the strategic thinking and the other around our service delivery. In terms of the strategic work we've undertaken, the COVID situation in Brisbane and in Australia is one which fluctuates. So in some ways, we're very privileged compared to other parts of the world. We've had various lockdowns and then opened up again. And in terms of planning for libraries, we've now moved to a position where we have plans for 4 different scenarios, and we are ready to pivot from one to the other at very short notice. We've also taken the opportunity to do more to support students and our university colleagues, so step out of the library box and think about how we provide spaces for students who actually wanted to come onto campus to take online exams. They didn't have the right environments at home, and they made choices about coming onto campus. And we also led the university in how to make space socially distant, whether that be teaching and learning spaces, but we started in library spaces, and we were able to remove chairs, disable PCs, and we took out 2/3 of our full complement, and we managed to do that in half a day. The whole library team worked on it, but we did it in half a day, and as you see from the top, we're a very big library service. The other strategic thinking we've been doing is around our budgets. And as David mentioned earlier, our income as a university, as a result of falling student numbers, has dropped. And we've been working with reduced budgets this year and expecting things to become more difficult next year. In terms of service delivery, we're in a very similar place to the place that Diana articulated for her university. We've shifted as much as possible to electronic with our collections. We couldn't get everything that we wanted electronically, which was on our core reading for our students, and moved to having conversations with academics and publishers to find alternatives or to open up more content. And they have been largely successful. We've moved more and more services online, kiosks, virtual kiosks on library desks, Zoom sessions for training, new training offerings are up to support students as they engaged with particularly the new online exam technologies. And as I say, we've done that work to make our spaces safe. And where I want to end is for those of us who think this has been incredibly difficult to keep our spaces open, we have had some incredibly positive feedback from our students, and we have had a level of usage in libraries which has set us apart from other parts of the campus and really do speak to the library as the heart of a university campus. So I end with a quote from one of our students who said, "We really, really, really appreciate that UQ has kept the Central Library open. I visited today and was able to make great use of the study space. I originally just intended to come in for the privacy of the study rooms and actually had a Zoom appointment that I was able to carry out in the library, but I was able to get some great study time in. It was great, and it felt like things were normal for a day."
Excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Karai. I thought, as with Diana's presentation, I thought there was lots of material in there for subsequent discussion. Firstly, congratulations on changing things around in half a day. I think you ought to offer a consultancy to other libraries, and I would say that the library has, as always in academic institutions, tends to be a beacon. The library does it first, and people look to the library. I think also you're absolutely right that the library continues to be at the heart of the institution, provided that the leadership is provided from the library, and it clearly is in both your cases and Diane's too. I guess one other takeaway to come back to is the point that Lucy and I made earlier, which was the point about there will still be a requirement for physical space. And I think that is important not to lose sight of that. Yes, we're all caught up in going digital, but it might be different, but it will be still a requirement for physical space. Many thanks, Caroline. We'll come back to all those points in a moment. Finally, Diane, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. These two have come up with so much good information. I might struggle here a little bit to not simply say ditto. We had a lot of the same experiences. I'm not going to address my slide all directly, but the points I want to make are all there for future reference. I'm going to go straight to what you just talked to about physical space, and that my first point is there. That priority point between library as place and digital libraries is certainly shifting, but I don't think that this is the end of the physical library. I just don't believe it. One of the ways that we stood out in academic libraries in the US is that we never closed throughout the pandemic. The library stayed open the entire time. And partly that was because we had students who needed us, and partly because we had some new services. So we were in shifting sands. Everything was moving, but University of North Texas has a really large program serving students who have aged out of the foster care program. So you can't close down the university and say, go home. This is home. We are home for these students. So the dining halls closed. They were served, packaged meals. You couldn't go anywhere. We were in full lockdown at the time for the city, but they could go to the library. This is the place where they could have a third place, where they could be safe, where they could have internet, they could do some printing. It was a place they could go just to be out of their dorm rooms. So really important for us to stay open. We also decided early on, it was clear to us that we were going digital. Everybody's courses were going digital, but that doesn't mean every student has what he needs to live in a digital world. So we talked to a lot of people, and we gathered every laptop we could find across campus. Every lab in every college that had 40 laptops here and 80 laptops here and 20 here. We gathered them all together till we had about 650 laptops. Re-imaged all of them, to serve a broader group of students because they were all very specific to the college. And then we checked them out to students first for 6 weeks, and then we renewed them for another 8 weeks to get them through the summer session. This was invaluable. They all went out. We ended up with maybe 40 laptops left out of that 650. Those were over 600 students who now could handle this transition, and the library made it happen. And that's one of my points. We need to shift our services now, not later. We're good at planning in libraries. We can take 2 years to plan something and it'll be fantastic, but that's not an option for us anymore. We need to do it now. We need to be prepared, have that creativity. The good news is we do that. We have a lot of people in libraries who are very stable and they like things a certain way. But we also have this creative streak, this ability to pivot and say, oh, I have an idea, I can help with that. So we take what we have to do physically and we shift into what we have to do digitally. We are a university that has a huge digital collection already. I was surprised by the number of people in the second question that said they have 61 to 80% of their collection digital. I don't believe we have that. I believe that I have 61 to 80, maybe 90, maybe 95% of my journals available digitally. But print books, we're just not there yet. And we have millions of books, eBooks. We have the huge collections. You all know what the collections are. But there are still a lot of books sitting on those shelves that if you're doing a certain type of research, you need access to those books. We don't have that, they're not available in e, and we don't have copyright access. So I think access to print is still going to be an issue that is very much one of the big issues that we're going to need to deal with. We've moved now after the worst of the pandemic, knock wood, into a hybrid model for the fall. We're all, fingers crossed, is this going to work? But we have a hybrid model, so campus is very thin. Most of the students are taking online courses and have maybe 1 or 2 face-to-face courses, the more experiential courses. We have a well-known music school and we have a well-known art school. It's really hard to teach ceramics online. It's really hard to teach vocal, trombone online. You need to be in person. So we are moving forward with a hybrid model, and the library is open. We're back to long hours. We did go to short hours for a while. That third place concept, and I know a lot of you are familiar with that. You can look it up if you're not. Starbucks wants to be your third place. Everyone should have a safe place to live and interesting work, and they should have a third place where they get their other needs met. It might be the pub, it might be your church, it might be the bowling alley, but for a lot of people, it's going to be the library. For students, we want it to be the library. They need another place to go. I don't think that's going to change. So I think I've come all the way around to digital and starting with physical all the way to digital and back around to physical. We're going to need to do both. The important thing is that we have the right reputation on campus, that we've set a tone that the library can do this. We can help you get through this transition. I think most of our libraries have done that. I think, as Caroline said, that heart of the campus, it used to be an old trope that we wanted to get past. Oh, not that heart of the campus business again. But the reality is we need to embrace that, because you need a heart. Everybody needs a heart. You can't live without it. So to be the core, you can call heart of the campus, but maybe what you really mean is the core of the information, the core of learning. We need to be right there. We are continually proving ourselves. We're going to have to do it again. I think that's enough for me for now.
That's great, Diane, and thank you to all the panelists. We've got a few moments where I'd just like to explore with you some of the things that you've brought up. And we've got a checklist on the screen there about what we might discuss, and this will also come out in the panel Q&A session. But can I just ask each of you, is there any one piece of advice that you would give to librarians based on your own experience? One thing above all that you would want the participants today to take away in terms of how do they cope with COVID? Caroline.
I've got a line that kind of works well for our experience here at UQ. We take care of ourselves so that then we can take care of our students and our academics. And it's like those airline safety videos where your oxygen supply comes down from above and you put your own on first, and then you can help people around you. So it's like we've got to be in the best possible condition we can be ourselves. That's our mental health. That's the way we're working as teams, the way we're communicating, so that then we can give our best to others.
Thank you. Diana, what would your key message to participants be in terms of advice to them based on your experience?
I think in this pandemic time, we don't see too many students coming back to use our facility. So everything is online. Classes are online, consultations are online. So I would say librarians have to step up into your service to reach out to our users and to provide as much as possible in terms of electronic resources, access to them, and assistance on how to use those services and those resources.
Thank you. Diane, anything to add to that bullet point?
I think the key word for me would be to prioritize. We're not going to be able to protect all the services we've always had. We're not going to be able to protect all the people we've always paid. Things are tight. We're in a hiring freeze. What I basically said to my staff and faculty of the library at this point was, so far I have been able to protect all of you, but the student budget is going to have to go down. We're not going to hire as many students this year. And they were horrified. They can't hire their full complement of students they've always had, but they don't need it because we're not open as many hours. The work is shifting. You have to choose. You can't do everything you've always done. You have to set some priorities and make sure there's room in those priorities for some new services.
Yeah, agreed. Moving very quickly on, could I ask each of you to just share with us one concern and what you're going to do about it for the future? Diana, a particular concern and what you're going to do about it for the future.
I think it's, as we discussed earlier, we still have a lot of print resources which are not available digitally. So one of my concerns is to how to make the balance to move some of our print collections into electronic resources. That involves a lot of staff time, financial resources. So how could we make the balance? We have done some internal analysis. We find out 60% of our collections are digital and 40% is print. But then in terms of usage, almost like 90-something%, over 90% of our users are from electronic resources. So that's a big number. That's a big usage from electronic. But we're not going to retire our print collection totally. So how are we going to make the balance? Where do we get the resources from? And how do we do digitization if copyright is still an issue? So these are one of my big concerns.
Okay, Caroline.
I'm going to build on a point that I made earlier, but also draw in one of the points that Diane made, and it's around both the ability to move quickly, and I gave the example of getting our spaces socially distant, but then we're not good at moving quickly with everything. And Diane talked about we can take 2 years to plan something because we want it right. And where I'm finding that the time to plan and there's the part of our ethos and psyche which wants us to get it right, which is slowing us down, is how we work with our academics around their learning resources in courses and thinking differently about them, how they're displayed in Blackboard, in our virtual learning environments, how they connect through to our reading list systems. It's a tangled web that's taking too long to shift and pivot.
Okay, and Diane, anything you want to add?
My biggest concern right now is funding. We are very dependent on a student fee. Before the pandemic even began, we were all lined up to have an increase in the fee in the next fiscal year, the 2 down. Nobody has any stomach for increasing fees right now. So I'm very concerned on how we are going to get our funding, and we've got to make a really good case for we are continuing to serve our students physically and digitally. So huge.
Thank you. I agree with that, and that's very much something, talking to other librarians, not just in the UK, but other countries I liaise with, that is very much a concern in the longer term. Now, there are a number of other bullet points on that slide. I'm not proposing to go through them all one by one, because I think panelists, you've already said what you've been doing so far. I just wonder, each of you, very, very briefly, if I could ask you to say what you're particularly proud of today, what has gone well, what you're proud of. I think you've already mentioned it, but just to reiterate, and possibly something that with the lesson learned could have done better, and whether there's any last point that you want to make in this session about a key takeaway message. I mean, you've already said it in some ways that it's not compulsory, but if there is anything else. So Diana, what are you particularly proud of, perhaps less proud of, and is there a key takeaway that you want to give to the participants today?
I'm very proud of my staff that in such a critical time, all of us are able to, hook up with each other and be able to come up with very resourceful, very creative, and very pragmatic measures to deal with both the physical protection side as well as the electronic access side. So we work, during the day, during the evening, and we have social media, WhatsApp connection to each other. So I think once when I put out a query, my colleagues just answer and come in, and then with the discussions and come up with very creative suggestions. So I'm proud of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Diane.
I'm very proud of how we made the transition to telecommuting and what a great job people have done with that. Even people we thought never really could handle it. What is going more difficultly is getting people back to work now that we're in a hybrid model where we need people on campus. They're still afraid to come to campus, and they're still very worried about our people wearing masks. So it's a hard sell to take someone who now knows their job can be done 100% from telecommuting to get them back to campus, and to come in just 1 or 2 days. That can be a tough sell. So that's going to be a really interesting transition to see how many people actually do come back to campus, even in the long run. It's going to be a huge transition for us. Indeed, and let's face it, that's going to be a challenge for our sector at large, and indeed our countries at large, other sectors. Yeah. Caroline.
The thing that I'm probably most proud of is the way that we've worked with others across the university, and it's all at all different levels. So the collaboration, the partnerships with student services, with exams teams, with timetabling teams, with property and facilities, with health, safety and wellness. The way that we've reached out and become part of the whole One UQ team. I'm really struggling to think of what's not gone so well. I'm clearly in denial, so I'm not with anything right now. Where I would like to end is that sense I have that we've got a real opportunity here, and a rare opportunity to really position our libraries as absolutely core and vital to the universities which we serve.
Thank you. Lucy, any final comments about what we've been talking about before we move on to the next poll and then the question and answer session?
Thank you. Yeah, just very briefly, what I would like to say is how interesting it is that students are so important, and what happens with students, what their behaviour, the behaviour of students going forward is vitally important. And there's a paradox, because although we think of when things go digitally online, courses go online, paradoxically what you might see is more students wanting to use the library because they need to get out of their rooms. They cannot live in one room, study in one room every single day. They have to go somewhere. And so ironically, although we're thinking of keeping everything at a distance, we might actually see more people coming in wanting those spaces. So that's a bit of a paradox that leads us to question the meaning of separation. The meaning of distance is not obvious.
Thank you, Lucy. Very powerful point. If I could just add to that, I talked very much at the beginning of this session about resilience, and it's clear that we have 3 librarians who are very resilient, and their library services are. I'm also reminded of what I said about it's not going to be as discontinuous as we think, because the word hybrid has come up several times. And I was very heavily involved in the 1990s, early 2000s, in what was seen in the UK and beyond as the new concept of the hybrid library. And we had a big electronic libraries program. And I have to dust off my old notes. They might still be useful. So without further ado, sorry, Diane, what did you say?
Yeah.
Hybrid journal, you know, we couldn't go straight to digital and electronic. We had to be hybrid first. Is
Exactly.
that what's happening now with libraries? Maybe,
Exactly.
maybe not.
Exactly, fascinating. Without further ado, I'd like to hand back to you, Sumi, because we have another poll, and
Yes.
then we have a number of questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for the panelists and to the speakers, to you, Professor David and Lucy, for this meaningful panel discussion. So before we start our question and answer session, let me invite our audience to poll number 4. Please, can we have poll number 4 on our screens now? Here we have. So I will encourage our audience to participate in this poll. The question is, please let us know, what do you see as the 3 main challenges and opportunities for the next 3 years? Our panelists have responded on this earlier. We would like to hear from you as well. Yeah, so we have responses coming in. Yeah, nearly 30% of our audience have voted. We're reaching to 50% mark. We'll have the poll open for a couple of more seconds. Yes, 55% have voted. We are just coming to the end. Please, those who haven't responded, please, from the audience, I'll request you to take on this poll question, respond to us, let us know your views. Okay, we have crossed the 1 minute mark. Please, can we have the results or responses now on our screen? Yeah, so the biggest concern is nearly 69% is providing new services. And then the second one is retaining and developing staff skills. Yeah, if I'm reading it correctly. And then the third one is maintaining access to collections. So the biggest one remains to be retaining and developing, this one, providing new services. So great. Thanks to our audience for letting us know their thoughts about their concerns. So let's move on to the last section of Q&A. Yeah, so so let's move on to the last section of Q&A. Thanking our panelists, yeah, and then question answers. So we have received a lot of questions now in the Q&A section, as well as on the registration page. Thus, to cover the maximum questions, what we have done is we have clubbed a lot of questions together so that our experts can answer. So I'll invite our speakers and panelists to answer a couple of these questions. First of them is, many of our audience would like to know, how should we cater to the user community as we transition from print to digital and now to remote? Any insights for setting our priorities and budgets?
We're going to have some rapid fire answers here. So, because we've only got about 5 minutes left. Caroline, any insights for setting priorities and budgets?
I'm minded of what Diane said about disciplinary differences and the different needs of different communities based on the discipline of study and research. I'm also minded of where our universities go in terms of attracting new students and new markets, and ours is certainly talking more and more about postgraduate students. So I'd be looking to a lead from my university around that, aligning with university.
Diane, anything to add?
No.
Okay, Diana?
Yeah, I think I hope this is a short term, but if it is going to last for one semester or another half a year, I think our priority will be set on supporting teaching and learning. So course reserve, course reading material, textbooks, if we could provide them in electronic format to help our students and faculty, that would be the best.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please, Sumit.
Yes, so the next question is, what are the practical ways libraries can effectively cope with changes that COVID-19 pandemic has brought upon the world?
I have to say, I think our panelists have already answered that question and answered it handsomely. Is there anything, panelists, that you would like to add to what you've already said on that one? Anything to add particularly at this stage?
No. I've got one, and it goes back to something that Lucy said right at the beginning about that keeping a sense of connection. So to everything that we've talked about today, that's the one thing that perhaps was only said once at the beginning that I'd want to come back to on this, that our contribution to the sense of connection of students, but also keeping connected ourselves with each other as we work remotely.
Good, okay, and we've already moved on to, can we have the next question, please? Is that,
yes,
yeah,
that's the third question. What are the specific activities in attaining the service delivery mission of libraries and in maintaining the engagement level?
Diane?
I'll throw something in there. It's very specific. When we brought all the students back to campus, they had first flight and they had all activities for the students online, and they were very poorly attended. They were tired of already so quickly, tired of online activities, games, fun. They just didn't see it. But the library had a Discord channel, and they were on Twitch putting new groups together of students to play Dungeons and Dragons, all kinds of online gaming, and we had nearly 1,000 students participate in our Discord channel and our Twitch, and that brought students together who didn't know each other previously, and it's an ongoing thing. It wasn't just for first flight. So if you can find those ways that you can be involved in connecting students, then you've also connected the students with you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Next question, I'm going to go very quickly.
Yeah, so the next question is very interesting one. How to market and promote the library services?
Diana?
I think we have to use online marketing, trying to reach your users, faculty, staff, and students through email, social media, outreach to them, invite them for example, virtual consultation, virtual conference, virtual meetings, so that if you don't see them face to face, we still, try to reach out to them and promote our services. Because a lot of the services that the library provide, faculty and student may not know. So we have to be more proactive and more aggressive into doing this.
Caroline, last word to you.
Completely agree with you, Diana. Yeah, proactive really struck a chord with me.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, I think we've answered. I think, yes, we will very much exist. I think we have a very vital, vibrant future, as demonstrated by what our three panelists are doing. So I actually feel very optimistic as a result of this webinar. And yes, physical libraries will exist. They will exist in a hybrid world, and a very necessary part of that hybrid world. Thank you to our panelists. Over to you, Sumit.
Yeah, There are more questions, but unfortunately, we are now close to an hour, and that's all the time we have today for the webinar. I thank our audience for their interest and engagement, and I also like to thank Professor David, Dr. Lucy, Diana, Caroline, and Diane for being with us today, sharing their expertise and joining us at the middle of the night for our audience in APAC. So to the audience, please watch out for our email with post-event survey, which you will receive immediately as we end the webinar. And link to the recording of the webinar will be also available. We look forward to your feedback and suggestions on the other topics that you like to be covered through this channel. Thank you for your participation.
Thank
With
you.
this, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you, panelists. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.